The pandemic border restrictions known as Title 42 ended at midnight, and that had that had been a policy essentially that really limited. It all started with COVID, but I suspect it was a hook on which a lot of immigration issues were hung to essentially try to reduce the flow of immigrants to the U.S. Now,
Apparently, about
yeah.
3 million people didn't gain entry to the United States seeking asylum during Title 42.
Oh, so there you go. Great
Yeah.
supplemental information because now you have what is expected to be a crush at the border and a guy who has really been part of this border conversation journalistically. I'm talking about reporting from the border with great contacts at the border. He's an award-winning journalist, and I asked him to join with us just for a few minutes today to kind of set us straight on what's happening and how big a crisis it is. How about it for from iHeartRadio and KFI Radio, Steve Gregory, everybody. Come on. Steve, thank you for being here, first of all.
Oh, nice library back there, Mark. Is that supposed to impress me?
It is my dad's library, so
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I'm at my
Very good.
dad's house, so
Because
yeah.
the other place, I was going to say that's a complete shift from what I'm used to seeing. But good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, I haven't touched any of these books, so I'm still the vacuous mouthpiece I've always been. All right, so Steve Gregory, tell me what's the reality of what's happening at the border?
Yeah, so the reality is it's a mess and it's chaotic right now, but it is organized chaos. I spoke to some border agents within the hour that have been telling me that surprisingly, it's been a pretty orderly situation down at the San Ysidro border. That's the area I'm focused most on because it's south of LA, and that's the busiest land border in the world, by the way. Title 42 expired at 12:01 overnight. And what that did basically is lift that restriction of being able to turn people away as they tried to enter to seek asylum. It was a health order. And after it expired, the Biden administration reenacted, if you will, Title 8. That's a law that's been on the books for decades. And Title 8 now says you have to have had to apply for asylum in the most adjoining country of your home country. And that was something that had not been enforced for decades. It was sort of just kind of like look the other way as people come to seek asylum. And they're supposed to seek asylum at the legitimate ports of entry, not across a border area east of the ports. Like I think people would be shocked to find out that the line between U.S. and Mexico, in some cases in eastern San Diego County, is nothing more than a single strand of barbed wire. And I've walked
Wow.
those things. I've walked that entire area. There's railroad tunnels that go through, and there's just whitewash over there. It says Mexico, United States. So there was a lot of porous areas of the border in eastern San Diego County, and you cannot seek asylum in that fashion. You have to go to a legitimate port of entry. So that's what's at issue here. But if they come to you and you say, okay, what other country did you apply to seek asylum with first, and you cannot provide that information, you will still be turned away, or you will be given an appointment with an immigration judge. Problem with that, appointments in the immigration court are taking somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 years. So the alternative is to put GPS monitoring on those individuals who have been released. And then at the last minute, a federal judge came in and said, you cannot start releasing people from detention centers or shelters within the United States unless they already have an appointment, they have some sort of tracking mechanism on them, or they are turned back to their home country.
So you said a lot. Thank you. That first of all, one of the things you touched on is something that I was reading this morning, which is that the crush at the border hasn't been as crushy as perhaps was expected. That doesn't mean there aren't tremendous numbers of people that have to be processed in the ways that you suggest. The other thing that you said that was interesting to me is that you have to process these people, then they wait for, and they're waiting then now with Title 42 expired, they're waiting in this country. They have to be housed. They're waiting in this country in some way for these things to proceed through the court for their moment in front of a judge.
Right. And that was part of the controversy during the Trump administration, because that was that wait in Mexico policy that the Trump administration had implemented. And that was the thing that was the most controversial during that era, was that if you came here to seek asylum, great. Well, you got to wait over there across the border, and then when your turn is up, then you can come back across the border and go before a judge. That became very complicated. It became convoluted, and a lot of people were stuck over there with no means to find out about their appointments. There's no one they could talk to. So the Border Patrol, or the Customs and Border Protection, I should say, under Department of Homeland Security, created an app, and they have to have an appointment in order to enter the U.S. to seek asylum. There has to be an appointment either through an app, or they have to stand in line and wait to make the appointment with an individual from Customs. Only then can they be considered. Now, in the initial interview, and a lot of people don't realize this, they have to go through an initial vetting interview. If that Customs agent doesn't feel that they've met the burden of proof for them seeking asylum status, they will be turned away and back to either their home country or back into Mexico. If they do display a legitimate need for asylum, then it goes to the next level, and that's going to be going before an immigration judge to argue their case. A border agent or a customs agent on the ground cannot make those decisions. They're only made by a judge.
But that initial screening to which you refer, the having to decide whether somebody legitimately is eligible potentially for asylum, who is making that initial judgment?
Well, those are going to be specially trained customs agents.
Okay.
Customs agents that have gone through very, very specific and rigorous training on what to look for, what to ask for, vetting whether the stories are legitimate, do they add up? Because let's be frank, there are a lot of people that simply just come in and say, well, I feel persecuted. Well, how do you feel persecuted? Then you got to run down the list. And the asylum laws are very specific. People don't understand that financial distress or poverty is not grounds for getting asylum. You have to be religiously persecuted. You have to, and you know, going back historically,
Sure.
the asylum internationally, the asylum laws were created after the Holocaust, and it was so that the Jewish folks were able to migrate to other countries, friendly countries, and be accepted. And that was when the asylum laws internationally were established. So, but they had to go to the next adjacent friendly country. And in this case, people from Central America, Brazil, or wherever, they have to go to Mexico, and they have to ask for asylum in Mexico first. And then, and only then, can they seek asylum in another country.
This is such a great point you're making. The legal hurdles are legitimately there. And if you're turned away for asylum now under Title VIII, it could be 5 years before you're allowed to reapply.
Right. And back to your other question, you were asking about it wasn't so crushy down there. That's because in the last week, that was where the crush was happening, because they knew the expiration of Title 42 was looming, and they were making last-ditch efforts to get across the country while there was more, I guess, if you will, lax. They perceived it as more of a lax law or lax way of getting in, because they could simply come across illegally, say, I want asylum. Well, you got to do this and that and the other. And having been down there numerous times over my 20-something years in this market, I could tell you that a lot of them just claim asylum status because then they get to go into a federal detention center, which is clean, it's safe, it's hygienic. They get 3 square meals a day. If nothing else, it's a respite from the kind of life they've been leading up till that point. And a lot of people were trying to get in at the very last second. And then you can hear megaphones from border and customs agents along the line down there telling people, do not try to cross illegally. Do not bring your children. It's dangerous. There's razor wire up there in Rio Grande, for instance, in Texas. That's the river. It's very dangerous. People have died coming across the border. So they are also admitting, these migrants are also admitting they had been lied to. The cartels had a very sophisticated marketing scheme going on because they were making tens of thousands of dollars on smuggling operations. And they were literally taking out ads in papers, running radio spots, television spots, putting up fake travel agencies to lure these people in to say, listen, we can get you into the United States, pay us, $2,000 a person, and we'll get you right up there. We'll get you across, and we have someone waiting on the other side for you. It's just easy peasy. And when they realize that's not the case, that's what's going on with hundreds and hundreds of these migrants now along the border in Tijuana, right there at the line. They've all been telling the border agents, we've been lied to. They were all told one thing, and the complete opposite is happening.
Kim, you?
Yeah, there was a decision this morning, and I just wonder what your thoughts are on this. I guess the Biden administration had a policy that would be to release some migrants crossing the border on parole. So basically, they were trying to alleviate overcrowding at those immigration holding facilities you were talking about along the border. But this morning, a federal judge in Florida temporarily blocked the policy to release the migrants crossing the southern border. Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of the Homeland Security Secretary, calling it a very harmful ruling. So, now they're not able to allow these people in on releasing them on parole into the United States.
Right, and the reason, and that was a push from the Republicans. The GOP were pushing that because statistically, those individuals that are released into the country very seldom, if ever, show up to their court appearance. So that's basically free entrance into the country, and that's why that's been a very controversial issue. Now, the overcrowding is another thing, but in the view of the Republicans and the border agents that I speak with, it is more effective to build bigger shelters and house these individuals than it is to release them out into the country, because once they're released, there is no interior enforcement. There's no manpower. If they skip their visa, their travel visa, their school visa, their temporary visa, there's no mechanism in place for interior enforcement to go get these individuals. If they're a no-show in court, there is simply not enough manpower to go grab these individuals and say, now you violated this court order, you got to go back to your home country. So it's basically a calculated risk on the part of those individuals coming in knowing, and that's why, again, this was a very controversial decision, because they looked at it, they viewed it, these migrants and the migrant supporters viewed it as a very simple way of getting into the country. As long as there's overcrowding, they're just going to release them, and then they're gone. There's no accountability. They don't know where they're at, and they very seldom, if ever, show up to court.
That's just a great breakdown on the realities. So the numbers, as you see it in our last minute here, Gregory, do you see the numbers increasing, or is this I mean, I know maybe it's impossible to handicap it, but I'm just curious, based on what you're seeing and also the people you're talking to, and with these policies in place, where do you see the border crisis? Where do you see it going in the next few months and over the rest of the year?
Well, I can only tell you what's been told to me by border agents and those boots on the ground. Last week, they were averaging around 9,000 to 10,000 a day that were coming in up until last night. And that number shot up from March. It doubled from March, the daily numbers, because there was that anticipation of Title 42 expiring. The numbers aren't in for today or in the last 24-hour cycle. That'll come in over the weekend. But I'm being told now, because of all of the attention that this has gotten, on both sides of the border, you're not going to have nearly the, at least in California, it's not going to get overrun nearly as bad as it is in Rio Grande, because the ports of entry in Southern California are a lot tighter, and geographically, there's no big river that separates the two countries like there is in Texas. That's why they're having so many problems there, because that river is deadly, and it's kind of a free for all in that river. But in the San Ysidro border, it's a very, very well maintained and secure facility. In fact, agents in the last 3 days have been training on crowd control, tear gas deployment, because the last time that happened was in 2018, when a caravan from Central America tried to rush the vehicle lanes at San Ysidro and tear through concertina wire, jump over fences, and they were all summarily pushed back with tear gas, and it was a mess on that day in 2018. So I don't want to say it's impenetrable, but I can say it's very, very difficult to rush through the San Ysidro border.
Yeah, they've learned a lot since then. It's such a tough situation on both sides of that wire. But Steve, so appreciate you taking time out to speak with us.
Of course.
Albert, I believe Steve should receive the rod of equity and mercy. Do we have it? Steve, stand by.
Receive the rod of equity and mercy.
Congratulations, Steve. You're part of the club now. Until next time, thank you, Steve Gregory. Appreciate it.
Take care, buddy. Be good.
Yeah. So, hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.